Good day, everyone. This is Naval, your OLC for Purposive Communication. Today, we are going to discuss the second part of communication for work purposes. It will cover the following: components of communication in a workplace, asking good questions which enhance communication, and the environment and communication. At the end of this module or lesson, you are expected to identify the components of communication in a workplace, and exhibit rapport in a workplace using your knowledge in the components of communication. Let's begin. The components of communication in a workplace. It is important to know how these components work together in order for effective communication to take place in a workplace or in other communicative settings. The first one is the individual sending the message or the sender. The sender must present the message clearly and with adequate details in order for the receiver to share meaning with the sender. Take note of that word adequate. If you would remember, there is a principle of communication which is adequacy. Adequacy, or having adequate details, means that the details are complete. Everything that the sender wishes to convey must be included in that message. Of course, a tip here would be to be empathetic, meaning the sender should put him or herself in the shoes of the receiver. So, whenever we are sending a message, we have to think like we are the receivers as well. If we're going to receive the message, that certain message that we're going to send, are we going to ask more questions? Or are the details all there? Next is the context for the message. The context of the message delivered by the sender includes nonverbal communication such as body language, gestures, facial expressions, and tone of voice. When we talk about context, these are other factors that affect the meaning that we convey. For example, the utterance is just, say, a word sorry. We know a sorry that is sincere, and we know a sorry that is sarcastic or not heartfelt. For example, sorry, I really didn't mean to do that. You can judge it because of the tone of the voice, and maybe if you can see the person's body language, gestures, and even facial expressions. Versus this sorry. Sorry, I didn't mean to. So, from the tone of the voice, you can easily tell which sorry is sincere and which sorry is not. Next, we have the person receiving the message. The receiver must be attentive to the sender in order to avoid misconception. He or she may ask questions for clarity. Let's take note of that word. We have attentive. So there is a major difference between listening and just hearing things. When we say listening, you understand, you tend to process whatever you're hearing. When you hear something, it just goes in from one of your ears and then passes through the other one. You heard the sound, you heard something, but you didn't make meaning out of it. That's not being attentive. Right? So you have to listen attentively. You have to be attentive to the sender in order to avoid misunderstandings and misconception. Of course, even if you ensure, as a sender, even if you ensure that all the details are there, some questions may still arise. These clarificatory questions should be addressed and should be answered accordingly so that the message would be conveyed completely. Also, you need to consider here the emotion. As a receiver, you have to take note of emotional cues from the sender. How is the sender feeling at the moment? What do you think is the emotion being conveyed together with this message? It's something that you need to look out for when you are a receiver. Next, we have the delivery method you choose. The method of delivery should be selected and vary depending on who the receiver is. Alright, so here, the receiver, you have to take note, you have to know the nature of your receiver, hence your audience. The method of delivery, to whatever channel or medium you choose, it should be appropriate and it should be efficient when it comes to considering your audience, the nature of your audience, and of course the purpose or the message that you're going to send. It includes verbal communication. For example, we have instant messages such as email, letters, posters, signs, etc. Because of technological advancement, these methods of delivery will continue to expand as modernization continues. All right, so for example, you're going to make an announcement to a certain group or to an entire department. Okay, you can make use of bulletin boards. All right, but if you're going to send a message to just a group, not the entire department, maybe you might want to consider emails. You might want to consider letters as well. So it depends. You have to know what your message is, what your purpose is, and of course, the nature of your receiver or your audience. Again, the delivery method should be appropriate and should make sending the message more efficient than the others that you did not choose. And lastly, we have the content of the message. The content of the message should be clear and understandable, and most of all, it should be free from any biases when delivered by the sender and perceived by the receiver. Again, it should be clear, understandable. You should use simple words. Make Do away with using jargons or technical terms that need explanation. You have to make sure that when you are using the vocabulary or the language, it should be within the level of the person that you are speaking with. Or conversing. All right, so it should be within the level of understanding. There should be that shared meaning when we're talking about the content of the message. And of course, it should be free from any biases, both from the sender and the receiver's end. All right, so when we're sending a message, although we are considering the nature of our audience, of course, we should do away with the biases or our assumptions with them regarding their personality. For example, all right, this person sending this message is pro something. Therefore, the message that he or she is going to send has that bias on him or her being pro at that something. We should do away with that. We should not judge the message because of the sender. And we should not also have that assumption that, oh, I'll be sending this message and it would be perceived this way because the receiver thinks like this. We should do away with that. We should interpret the message as objective as possible and not judge it how it would be received or how we could send it because of the person. So let us separate the person from the content of the message because they are two different things. All right, so let us interpret the message or the content of the message as objective as we can. There you have it for the different components of communication in the workplace or any other communicative setting. Again, it is important to understand how they would interact with one another so that we can make the necessary adjustments, we can make the necessary amendments if the need to be done if the need arises. All right? Next, we have asking good questions enhances communication. Okay, so we need to ensure that we ask the good questions so that we get the details that we need. First, what are the types of good question? These are the following: direct, control, repeat, persistent, summary, and non-pertinent. Let's take them one by one. Direct. This is in the form of interrogative question. So we have an example here. Who are you? What are you doing? What is that? Where is your hometown? So in here, you are getting a certain bit of information. So you go direct with your question. You don't beat around the bush. It's as direct as it can be. Next, we have control. Control is knowing the answer to your question but still wanted to ask it to check if someone knows the answer. Let's have an example. How did you arrive at a certain solution to the problem? This is assuming that you already know the answer. All right. So if you want to know the answer, but you just want to make sure or to check how someone was able to know it as well, you can ask a control type of question. All right. So this is the solution that you came up with. How were you able to think of it? What gave you the idea that that is the answer? Those questions belong to control. Next, we have repeat. Repeat is asking two different questions after the same information. Let's have here the example. How many regions are there in the Philippines? Then to be followed by, how many is the total population in the Philippines? So the common information here is you are asking about the Philippines. Okay? So in the first question, you are after how many regions. And in the second question, you are asking about the total population in the Philippines. So for example, in Manila, how is the COVID situation in Manila? What is the average number of cases per week in Manila? So we are talking about, you wanted to know things about Manila, specifically the COVID situation in Manila. And then you ask a follow-up question like, what is the total number or what is the average number of COVID-19 cases weekly in Manila? Right? So that is repeat. Next, we have persistent. Persistent is asking the same questions in a different way to explore all preferred information. All right, so here's an example. Where did you go on your vacation to California? Then the follow up question would be, where else? So, for example, you've gotten an answer. Where did you go on your vacation to California? Ah, I went to the Golden Gate. Oh, that's nice. So, where else? So, where else in California did that person go? Right. So it's a follow up question that would let you explore. Okay? All preferred information. For example, you are now interested, say you are done questioning where he or she went for his or her vacation in California. Now you're concerned with the food. All right, so were you able to try different foods there? How about exotic foods? How about their delicacies? How would you compare the two? Okay, all of these questions would also belong to persistent. Next, we have summary. Summary is asking questions that allow revisiting an answer. For example, did I actually say what I meant to say? Alright, so given the scenario, we're discussing about this lesson. Right, after discussing about the different components of communication in the workplace and the different types of good questions. Alright, so did I actually discuss what I am meant to discuss? What were the important takeaways that you've gotten? Okay, so that's a type of a summary question. Okay, you ask that question to allow revisiting an answer. Did I explain that correctly? Did you get what I mean? Okay, so these are questions that fall under summary. And lastly, we have non-pertinent. Non-pertinent meaning asking a question that does not pertain to the subject you want to know about. So non-pertinent questions are usually used when it comes to interviews or job interviews. For example, what project did you undertake in the past that failed? And how did you try to fix the problem? So why are they non-pertinent? Because these are the questions that are, you cannot really prepare for them. They are not stipulated in the resume. So in the resume, you really have to be aware of, or you really have to know by heart your employment history, your educational background, your the different skills that you indicated, their objectives, so on and so forth. But these types of questions that are used in interviews are more situational, and you cannot really prepare for it. Well, there are a lot of questions, guide questions for job interviews online, which you can rehearse for. But this is something that might catch you off guard when you're already in that situation. So again, non-pertinent. They are not directly related to what is stipulated in your resume, but they are needed in a way that they're situational. But it's something that you cannot really prepare for. It's something that you have to think about at that place, at that moment. right? So again, questions like, what do you consider as your greatest weakness? Why did you say so? Okay, so these questions also belong to non-pertinent. Okay, so those are the different types of good questions. Again, it is very important that we ask the right questions so that we also get the right details, right? Which could reinforce further and make the information originally conveyed clearer than how we received it. Lastly, we have the environment and communication. So for this one, the work environment in which components were used and implied affects the manner of communicating and how communication is being received. Again, we have to take note of the work environment. And in the work environment, the following are included. We have the present condition of that environment. Of course, we also have the external factors. We also have the culture. We also have different personalities, individual differences of people within that environment. So when we talk about work environment, even the location, even how conducive it is, no ventilation, these would all fall under work environment. And as students as you are, when we talk about work environment, this is not solely for those who are already working. As students, you have your own workplace. So everything that we have discussed would matter to you. As students, your workplace could be anything school related. So if you have, whether it is face to face or the digital platform, you have your workplace there, especially when you're asked to work in groups and come up with an output. So basically, you need to work together, and you have that workplace, even in the digital or face to face method. All right. So for work environment, again, we have cultures, we have differences in personality, even the conduciveness of the surroundings that would all fall under work environment. Now, there are differences in the environment from one company or institution to another. So we cannot assume that what works in one company would work in another company. Okay, we can always try, but it's a matter of trial and error. And you really have to be observant before you make a move. Okay, so that's it for the environment and communication. Thank you so much for listening. That's about it for today. And again, please, even as students, you have your own workplace. So this lesson is not only for those who are working, but for everyone, students, working people, and everyone basically dealing with others in order to achieve a goal. Thank you so much. That's it for today. Have a nice day.